Welcome back to the Unily Podcast. I'm Paul Seda. I am joined once again by Alex Gabelli. Alex, you keep leaving us, but you keep coming back. We must be doing something right. We're also joined by a couple newcomers, Katie Johnson and Lewis Munt. Katie, what do you do at Unily? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hello, I'm a product manager, so I work with Matt Boyd and Kaz. I have the pleasure of working with those two guys.
A better substitute.
Oh yeah, of course.
Yep,
of course.
We got 1 for 2 and it was
it was a
totally
build
worth
up. It was a build up. I was just, making sure that the podcast held credibility before I joined. So I have worked for Unily, oh my god, about 3 and a bit years now. Started as a consultant. It's the usual route to product managers, I think. So I was a consultant for a couple of years, working with our customers, helping to design and deliver their intranet solutions, employee experience solutions. And beginning of last year, I moved to the product manager role. So now I work with the development teams to design and develop the features that we deliver to our clients. And also help to define our product roadmap as well.
Awesome. Thank you. And also joining us, Lewis. What do you do here at Unily? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm a senior UI developer, so I make things pretty and nice to use.
He draws pretty pictures.
He draws.
Yeah. Get my crayons out.
That's what we give him crayons and some construction paper, and he goes ham.
You can see some of them in Alex's background.
Oh, is that Lewis's art? Alex, that's creepy. You're hanging up Lewis's art. But we know you do it out of the goodness of your heart to make him feel good about himself.
It's quite found the picture as well.
Right. Awesome. So I actually want to ask what's going on in your world aside from Unily. Lewis, anything interesting going on in your world? Books, news, movies, television, anything you can share with us that you'd recommend or you think is interesting?
Well, lockdown's still hanging around for us at the moment, so options are limited. But I got a PlayStation 5 the other day.
Ah, there it is.
Yeah.
This is the last we'll see of Lewis for a long time.
It was tricky to get to win a raffle.
That's a good way. Well,
to get the option to buy it. So there was a lottery to get a chance to buy one.
So you had to enter for just the right to give them your money.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to try that. That seems like a pretty cool scam to run. I'm going to see what I can get people to pay me to just, offer the opportunity. Chris will cut that. That's awful. Katie, tell us a little bit about yourself, Katie.
Okay. So I've been really lucky over lockdown because I live with a couple of housemates, who are actually my friends as well. I actually like my housemates. So every weekend we've been trying to, plan something, whether it's a Hawaiian themed party, making pina coladas, doing afternoon tea, pretending to be posh and drinking Prosecco and eating scones. And, just try to do something different each weekend. We've got to the point now where we're just rinsing and repeating those plans, but we have a ton of decorations now for various different themes that we've put on. So that's been pretty fun. In terms of TV programs, my current guilty pleasure is Below Deck. I don't know whether any of you watch that.
I know of Below Deck. It's an American show, isn't it?
Yeah. It is, and it is amazing. It's everyone's faces is like, oh my god, Katie.
There's no judgment.
Yeah, I'm sure.
There's no judgment.
There's plenty of judgment.
Yeah, Lewis is judging. Okay,
it's great. Just watching crazy people try and work on a ship, or a yacht. It's really cool. So I've been watching that every weekend.
And that really is. And that really is the gist of the show. It's crazy people working on a yacht.
Oh, yeah. It's fun.
Alex, anything you want to share going on in your world?
So I have had the pleasure of not being in work for the past week. So that's been quite nice. So what I did was I set myself the task of staying away from computers as well. So I've had kind of mostly a screen-free week because, of course, I have an iPad and, that's been on all the time. But not the screen because I've been modifying my Spotify playlist. It's pretty awesome. So, if I
time well invested. Wow.
Oh yeah, every day, a few more minutes of that, and then mostly been doing sort of like, I guess what you'd call sort of analog type art and things like that. So really getting back to basics, and I think it's just something you need to do every once in a while, just kind of tune it all out. And just try something a little bit different. It feels a little old school because it's, where I started. So it's just kind of rediscovering stuff. And definitely, because I can't go anywhere, that's what I've been doing for the past year, really, is saying, okay, well, if I can't go to an art gallery, I'll just make my own art then. and then discuss it with myself. So that's pretty much
right.
it.
Or take Lewis's art, hang it up. And,
because when mine's not working out, what I do is I then steal Lewis's art, and those crayons are really working out for him, so I need to really encourage him as much as possible. So
they're like Rorschachs; they're windows into his mind, and I hope we all can learn a lot from that.
Not windows into mine at all.
I started barbecuing. I bought a barbecue. I mentioned I recently bought a house. You buy a house, you buy a barbecue. It just goes hand in hand. And I'm a charcoal guy. I did propane with my folks for years and years. And my buddy, whenever I went to his house, his stuff tasted better. I said, why? He said, because I use charcoal. Propane is the devil's gas, and I won't use it.
Are you using any flavored wood chips?
I am not using
flavoring.
I am not using anything. I have seen a bunch of people tell me apple is wonderful. I like the good old-fashioned hickory when I have had the wood chips, so that will probably be in my second test. I just want to get the low and slow method down with my first test. For those of you who are barbecue aficionados, you got to maintain that fire and that temperature for hours and hours and hours, and it is a lot of work and very trying. So that's what I'm going to do. I have to crawl before I can run. Let's put it that way.
Start with a few variables and get them right. Then introduce
That's right. Just like we build stuff at Unily. And on that note, look at that transition.
Wow.
We try to make this non-salesy, and we try to make it as agnostic to the platform you're using as possible. We give you customer examples, obviously, because we know our customers, and it's through the lens of Unily. But we try not to be too, Unily rah, even though we're all very happy doing what we do. But breaking news about Unily in our world, which we're all really happy about, is the Nielsen Norman Group Awards are out. It's an award that we have near and dear to our hearts. We participated for a bunch of years at this point. We always do pretty well, but this year we did really well. There's been unsubstantiated claims that we are the first company to have 4 winners in a single year. Again, unsubstantiated, but we're regardless of whether or not that's true, we're going to run with it. We want to believe that, and we're super excited about it. And as a result, actually, I'll give you the winners first. Johnson & Johnson, Baker Hughes, Cathay Pacific, and Commonwealth Care Alliance are the 4 winners, and we were so thrilled with the results that we're actually going to be hosting a webinar on May 6th with the project team from Baker Hughes to talk about what went into it, how they set out to design their platform, their employee experience platform, digital workplace, intranet, whatever they want to call it. It's their right. And it'll be hosted by our very own Matt Boyd. So you don't always see Matt here, but you can see him there. If he's the reason you're listening to the podcast, there's ways to get your fill of Matt through other channels other than this. So go ahead, have a look at that. And that actually lands us nicely into our topic today, which is designing employee experience, right? So we have Katie, who's very much a part of the, ideation and the speccing and the ideas of building out new features and functionality in the Unily platform, including what they kind of should look like. Lewis is the grunt. He actually does the work. He knows how to do it. He's laughing at that. But grunt is not anything to be ashamed of. I'm, very proud to be a grunt. And then Alex is oftentimes on the onboarding implementation side, right? So she takes the fruits of Katie and Lewis's efforts and deploys it for our customers and works with them and tells them how best to use it. So we thought that was a really nice broad spectrum of people who work on design in Unily, which leads us kind of to like the initial question of what's design. And I'm not looking for textbook answers, right? I want to understand how you guys understand design as it relates to your work. So Katie, I'll start you off since you're at the front end of the production line. What in your mind is design? And I guess what's that versus UI and versus UX in your mind? No wrong answers.
Sure. I'm going to try and use an analogy, which... everyone uses a house analogy, right? So I don't know whether I've made this up or whether I've stolen this unconsciously.
Clearly stolen, but go for it.
Probably. So I guess design is built up of UI and UX. So I describe UX as the experience a user gets when using that product or functionality. And that's from start to finish, right? So if we were using the house analogy, it's the experience of them navigating through the house and getting to, the kitchen or the bedroom. And, from that journey, having a seamless experience, intuitive experience, knowing that probably up the stairs is the bedroom and a bathroom, and downstairs is the living room, and being able to navigate that intuitively and have a positive experience through that. UI is making it look pretty, branded, and it's kind of whether what colors you use, what typography you use, and it's kind of like the tip of the iceberg of the overall design experience, right? So house analogy again, what wallpaper design are you going to use? Are you going to use paint? What carpets are you going to use to kind of make that house look pretty? So that's my kind of thought on what design is. And did that analogy work?
It works, but I can see Alex wants to contradict you. No, I'm teasing. Well, Lewis, what do you think? You've been doing UI work at Unily for a while. At this point, like how do you think of design? Like what falls within the scope of what you do?
I mean, design's quite a broad term. You've got kind of visual design and functional design, which I'd say most people probably think of when you hear the word design. They're going to think of the visual side of things, but then like the functionality needs to fit in with that to make the UX right. Because if it looks really nice but it's horrible to use, then that's no good to anyone. And then if it's really nice to use but looks horrible, it's still not that appealing. So you need to take both into account and kind of get them both right and working well together.
Do you think one informs the other, or are you constantly cycling back and forth between one and the other? That's an odd question, I know, but I sometimes hear people say form follows function. But it sounds like you think there's a little bit more of a give and take between the two.
Yeah, I mean, one, you need both, and they both need to work well together. There's no point having a button that does something if it doesn't look like it's a button that does something.
That's fair. No, that's fair. And Alex, how do you think of design in terms of, or at least how do you talk to design about with your customers, right? Because when I'm in the sales process, I think customers are a lot like what Lewis is saying in that they think of their logo, they think of their colors, they think of their font. And then they think of that big hero image across the front, right? Like that's design. And I'm like, well, I think of it a little bit differently, but I'm curious what your experience has been and how you define it for them.
Yeah, so I usually bust that straight out. First conversation is like, okay, that's part of it, but for me, design has always been about problem solving, really, and bringing those pieces together. So I guess a little bit of it is tempered by what I do in terms of using the product or what part I play in the design. But I guess I'm like, if I use a slightly different analogy, it's sort of like if you're in a sort of publishing house, I'm the layout person, right? So we've got all of these pieces that we need to put together, and I need to help them put them together so that the messaging is clear, so that that journey is clear, so that some things are signposts, some things are just simply, you know, a button, and it's placed in the right place for people to be able to see it. So I guess I lean more towards that experience side of it, but it is very much, you know, dependent on what the others are doing. But for me, it really is about the problem solving and really saying, okay, how are we going to make the most of this? I do tend to have sort of offside conversations as well, saying, okay, well, if you really want to make something great out of this corner of your page, let's say, why don't we talk about the imagery you're using and what we can do with that to enhance it? Or why don't we talk about the messaging you're using, or your headlines, or whatever? So there's a lot of different elements. And I guess you could nominally call them design, and I think they are. You know, all of those, when I used to work in magazine publishing, all of those things come into play. It's the words that you put on the page, the pictures you put on the page, and then where you put them and what you put them next to. And so it is certainly made much simpler with the way in which we work for me, but at the same time it's a challenge because I have a lot more limits. You know, I can only do a certain set of things, and every time I want something new and imaginative that solves all those problems. So
yeah, and I think I fall in your camp, and I'm going to inject an idea that maybe isn't yours, but this is how I'm interpreting it, is that I'm a little bit more of the form follows function type, but that's also because I have no artistic skill whatsoever. So I tend to be very utilitarian in my taste. I tend to like modern design, very clean lines, stark things. I love grays and blues, and gray blue together is like the best color as far as I'm concerned. You can probably tell by the room behind me. I'm going through the process of redesigning my home. But yeah, I tend to be a form follows function type. And I actually think, I always thought of it as there's this is going to sound terrible, not layers. There's levels of design, meaning there's designing for a particular element on a page. Whereas when I was consulting and implementing, I didn't care about a particular element. I cared about how that particular element worked with all the other elements on the page so that the user understood why they might want to look at or interact with that particular element relative to the other ones on the page. And again, that's as someone who gets to design the house overall rather than the person who's designing the countertops or just the wallpaper, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. I guess like when we're, there's, I guess, two sides of the coin, right? So myself and Lewis, like we work in the product team, we, you know, design, we look at, you know, I look at what like challenges do our customers face, and what functionality should we design and deliver to clients so that they can use those to overcome their challenges. Now, all our customers, like working on the customer facing side, you know, we may have similar challenges, but all customers have different challenges, right? So like Alex from saying what you do, but when I worked in the consulting team, it would be a case of using all of the tools and things that the product team have like delivered and making sense of that to you know, overcome clients' challenges. And that may be, you know, clients face a challenge where you know, their employees aren't able to find or access relevant knowledge articles to help them and support them doing their job. They're always, you know, raising a support ticket, calling, you know, their friend, you know, down a few desks down, and you know, you want to stop that. And it's okay, how do we use these tools to create a great design and user experience, so that we can, you know, provide value to the end user.
It's not a single thing, is it? It's putting, I think Katie's on the money. It's kind of like if you deliver in pieces, sometimes it's then, you want to be able to put those pieces together so that you need one and the other one to give the full experience. And then
the Lego blocks.
Lego blocks.
The Lego blocks.
And I think there's also that element, and I know that Katie, you and I have conversations about this sometimes, is about pushing the envelope, which is something that I love to do with design, which is, okay, so Katie tells me this is why she's designed something and this is what it's used for. And I go, okay, what if I use it for this? And so I sort of, without breaking anything or sort of changing anything, it's saying, I know that there was a set of criteria in place to create a feature, but what are the other possibilities for that feature in order to resolve those problems without having to redesign the feature or create another feature? And I think that's what I really like, is seeing that possibility in there.
And let's take a step back, because we're talking very specifically, I think, without even saying it, about internet employee experience, digital workplace design, which I've been doing this a long time, and the thing that everyone always tells me is it has to look beautiful. It has to look beautiful. It has to look beautiful. And I want it to look like my public website, or I want it to look like this public website. And I wonder if I know the answer, right? Because I always know the answer. I'm the host. I kind of game the system. I've already laid out where we're going with this, and I'll say it. I wonder if there's a difference between internet design and design elsewhere. So I've worked on public websites. I've also worked on applications that were not intranets that had a specific purpose in terms of driving a user's behavior. So a CRM system, I want to collect data and make it easy to collect data and have that user update that data, right? That calls for a totally different thing. So I'm curious, and I'll start with Alex this time. What are the difference between intranets and maybe other things, since you're the artist of the group? Sorry, Lewis. I'm giving her that label.
But he gave me his crayons, so I'm free to go. I actually agree with you. So I have a background in sort of, I guess, website design and all of the criteria that went with that, and like actually dealing with clients and customers from that side of things, and kind of getting those requirements and creating design. And I feel very much like, okay, so again, this might be because of the nature of the work I currently do, but for me, it's a smaller box to play with, really, because the audience is captive. So I don't treat the design as if I'm, you get what you're given kind of thing. That is not the principle that we follow. But we don't have to reach out and grab anyone. We don't have to make things so edgy and so new and flashy that we're attracting attention that might be given somewhere else, which you would find outside. But we do get to deliver the best of what all of those web and app sort of functionalities will give us, because we don't have to be distracted by this other sort of, I guess, that kind of like flashiness piece. It's not to say we don't have some, because like, all credit to Lewis, we have some spectacular pieces of functionality. And I'm not being all like, woo, love you, Lewis. It's very much true. I work with a toolkit that's phenomenal, but I also get to play in a much smaller box, and I get to use it for what it's meant for. And I don't have these distractions where I'm competing with, something else, and I got to make what I would normally want to be that blue-gray. I got to make it orange, otherwise nobody's going to pay attention. So I can, fit it really in. And the conversations with clients are so different and so sort of, I guess, more meaningful, because I see the meaning in it. I don't have to add that sort of nonsense flash. And I don't have to, and it doesn't have to be as snazzy, and I guess that all the things that sort of drove me nuts working with clients externally, hopefully. They're all okay with that.
Different though.
Yeah.
Like it's most websites are a marketing tool.
Yes.
They're
that's
driven by sales and to get people to sign up, spend money. They want to grab your attention and funnel you in a certain direction.
Yeah.
But we're doing something different. We're helping people to do their job.
Yeah.
And
make it good, right?
Yeah. Like you need to be able to find stuff easily, and each user has a different path and a different need from the intranet. Whereas rather than just trying to get them to sign up by like, look at this one page, like a different user from different departments is going to need very different things.
You have to have more going on. Yeah.
Yeah, and that actually reminds me of an example I heard recently where they said, look, it's really simple what I want. You guys have probably seen this on websites. They said, I want an infinite scroll on a page. They said, can you do this, right? And I immediately said, the answer is yes, but go ahead. Because I wanted to hear what they were saying, because Unily is fairly flexible. And I would say most of the modern technologies are pretty flexible in terms of what you can do. If you know what you're doing, right? There's a skill set that's a requirement for design. Good design is extremely difficult, in my opinion. But anyway, we'll get to that later. And they said, I want my users to show up at the page. And then I want to have an infinite scroll or semi-infinite scroll where they have to continue scrolling. And they're getting more messages coming up on the screen or flying out from the corners. And then at the end of all of that, they can take the action. And I said, okay, could you do that 100%? But why would you put someone through that, especially every time, especially if this is going to be a recurring thing they have to do? That first time scrolling through is kind of nifty and getting the instructions in that way. But having to do that every single time to do a task gets a little bit irritating. When in fact, when I'm at work, I need to move fast, rapidly, right? So that's the example I think of based on what you're saying, Lewis. And I guess, Lewis, when you're building, like, do you sometimes want to break out of your mold and go, I want to make this really cool, complicated animation? And how do you fight that? Does that happen to you? I wonder.
Well, I'm kind of in your camp. Like, I'm a fan of brutalist design for web. So, like, pared down minimalism.
Understood, comrade. Tell us more.
So, I mean, it still needs to look nice.
Right.
It needs to look beautiful. But I need less bells and whistles because I've seen too many, and too many done badly, like in the web. There's wow factor, and then there's just like, you're stopping me from doing what I need to do. You can still make something look beautiful, really impressive, visually striking, but that can't be at the cost of letting the person use the site or the page.
Yeah,
because they have to understand it, don't they? Like, looking at it in that simplicity and that brutalism. I'm kind of with both of you, I think, on that one. Allows people to, it brings in the intuitiveness in a way, because I understand it. It's clear, it's concise, and I know everybody goes, oh yeah, simplicity is key. It's true. Don't start adding all the flash and the bells and the whistles and the distractions if you really want somebody to be able to achieve something, because it's just going to be frustrating. Some people are entertained by it, but a couple of days in, bearing in mind this is an intranet we're talking about, it's just a frustration. I want to get to the work that I'm trying to do, or that one item, and I think it's much also, as the layout guy, it's much easier to work with a simple set of tools than it is to work with something that has all kinds of other bits added into it, because sometimes you then have to overcompensate for those.
Yeah, I think, like, you don't, if you come back to like the challenges of what we're trying to achieve through like an intranet and employee experience, one of those is to provide employees with the tools and the knowledge to get their job done more seamlessly, have access to the information that they need to go and complete their tasks, and not have to waste time, crawling through like crazy animations each time to try and find things, because another challenge that like customers or companies face is engagement as well, right? So if you're trying to stop or prevent people from wasting other people's time by from them like contacting other people to answer questions that you can find and self-serve yourself, you don't want to then stick an endless, like a scroll to get to the information they need. You don't want them to have to navigate through that every single time, because they're just going to get annoyed and
frictionless.
Yeah, and then they're going to be like, oh, forget this. I'm just going to go and call Ben, and he's going to tell me all the answers, and I'm going to waste his time. And it's going that's the thing, right? It's going to happen. But then I guess there's also the other part of that is UI still has an important role to play in my mind, because it's all well and good having the right content there, making it functional. But so I've recently been working on a project with Lewis as well to update our new mobile experience. And first impressions mean a lot as well. And employees are used to, in their consumer grade apps, right? They're used to good experiences and impressive design. And if you don't capture them through, if something looks old, outdated, doesn't look nice, I think you're going to lose some people. Now, that's not to say that that's you're gonna lose all of your users if you don't have a good design. But I do think having a good design, using good imagery, using colors and typography that captivate your end users is really important, because ultimately that UI design is gonna basically it looks at if you use certain colors, it brings out emotions in people. So there's loads of, I guess, psychological studies out there and about how important colors are, imagery are to the overall design of a site.
I no, 100%. It's funny. We keep saying it's a balance. And people don't understand that. But I think by us showing examples and then maybe even correcting ourselves, we show them why it's so tricky. For me, again, I know what is beautiful. I can tell you what looks good, right? But I don't necessarily know how to build something. So I think I always tend to, when I was doing implementations or onboarding or when I was a consultant before I joined Unily, it was all right, tell me what you want to do. And then let's throw something on a page and react to it. It's not going to look good. I promise you it's not going to look good. But at least you'll understand, we have to start somewhere. And I tend to favor iteration on this. I still deal with people who think good design means some, really brilliant artistic genius going off in a room alone, composing something, and then it's released to the world. And I don't think intranets work that way in my experience. I mean, well, Katie, but you must iterate in the design process, or do you get it right first time every time?
I'm 100% perfect.
Lewis is saying no. Go ahead.
Me and Lewis
there's some back and forth.
Many calls arguing.
Really?
About designs.
Yeah. I mean, there'll be what's supposed to be a 5-minute conversation will turn into an hour long argument.
And it is very much an iterative, approach. You can't get it perfect 100% of the time. And one of the big challenges that I find designing features for a SaaS product is that we're designing features that all of our customers are going to use, right? And there might be multiple use cases. Alex said before that she tries to stretch, the features that we deliver. And that, we've got to expect that. We design features and say, okay, well, how are our customers going to use this? And we may have, the perfect solution in mind. We want them to use it in exactly this way, but they could go and stick it on any page. They could stick it across multiple width columns, because we've got the configurability, right? We design and deliver features that then our customers can then go and do what they will to a certain extent with those features. And that's really challenging because our customers do use, will come up with something that you would never have thought of. And we need to make sure that the features that we design can the use cases that they deliver meet our customers' needs. And we always try and aim for the 80-20 rule. In terms of iterative design, I think we need to iterate design. We have, we've recently worked on a design language over the past year. So me and Lewis have worked together on some of that. Because, design changes over time. There's new trends that come in, and you know, it evolves over time.
But Lewis, I want to come back to the iteration component, because I worked as a developer and I hated when customers would come back to me and say, change this, change that, change this, change that. Does that annoy you, or do you actually feel more comfortable iterating in terms of design when you're actually building it?
I mean, I try and get to that iteration before stuff's built. So we've got the stuff like designed out in XD, and then at that point, and with the acceptance criteria, that's where I try and get in and review it and discuss any potential pain points then.
Right, like a professional instead of a dope. Yeah. And then I found that definitely helps with like trying to change and tweak little things once we've finished building, which, I mean, occasionally does happen, but it's better to get those discussions done early. Go ahead, Katie. No,
I was just going to say, and to a certain extent, like there's things that you need to iterate before you develop, just because there's a better way of doing things at that point in time. But I think, you know, over time, it is good to iterate design, because, you know, we're going to introduce new features that may mean that. An example is we've got a feature where it will show you whether you've read a piece of content before. Now, with that, as an example, we've introduced that feature. Well, now we want to display that information on some of the features that we've delivered before. So, you know, all of the story, news widgets, etc., that we have developed previously, we now want to provide that, like display that information on that feature, because it's useful. And I think, you know, because we're like we build those out as components, it's good to like iterate those designs and add that piece of information into those as well. It's good to iterate, and I think naturally, like things do develop over time, but obviously the things that you try to capture before your release, it's just because there's probably a better way of doing things at that point in time, which Lewis captures and highlights when I propose.
Oh, so he's going Katie and like shaking his head at you, like what are you thinking?
Yeah, what have you done here? Yeah, it's a mess. So, and that's the thing, right? Again, with the challenge of the configurability, although it's really good for our clients, it's a challenge for me and the product team, because there's so many different like variations of how clients may want things, and it's trying to think through all of those to design something that is going to, you know, be useful to the majority of our clients. And, you know, the feature store helps us in that regard as well. Feature store plug, where
just plug in feature store.
The feature store plug.
Yeah.
Is that a code name that we don't know about?
No, she's plugging the feature store.
I was like, I was like, she has a secret button that gets her out of jail free with the feature store. I want access. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I've just noticed the sun's just shining and we like
lens flare. Yeah, no, you're a JJ. What's his face film? Abrams. Thanks. See, Lewis gets me.
I do.
Alex, I thought you were going to say something. I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say what I'm really enjoying about this conversation is I actually, unfortunately, don't always get the insight into what's going on with how these things are brought forth. I sort of am on the receiving end, really. I know that I'm in delivery, but I'm receiving these things through and then making of them something that the customer is now looking to, you know, they want to use them now. And this has just been quite educational, really, because, you know, it's the things that I say that, you know, yeah, we might have new features coming, we might do new things, but we also want to make sure you can keep using the stuff you've got. That's the idea, is all of it has to have a cohesion, and all of those, it's interesting to note, arguments that Lewis and Katie have, and because, you know, I argue with myself mostly, and I don't want to argue with product. I'll lose, that's why. So I just think these are all really interesting, because going back to just what you were saying about balance, we call it balance, but what it really is saying you cannot do this without every single one of these elements, you know. So we're looking for the balance between them, but ultimately you got to be considering all of these things that we're talking about, or that design is just going to stall. before it gets anywhere.
Yeah, and we had a brainstorm session in preparation for this, and we have those with every podcast where we just kind of talk. Okay, what do we want to talk about broadly? And Lewis brought up that intranets are really hard because you have to design for the majority of the people, right? Not a very specific person. And this is something I try to express to my customers is like, I know you in your mind have the perfect design, but bring 10 random people from your organization into the same room and ask them each to draw a picture of what they think is perfect. You will have 10 different pictures. So imagine now when you're dealing with millions of users like we are, or rather Lewis and Katie are when they're designing, because they have to accommodate millions of users, because that's our user count at Unily. How impossible that task is. So Alex is saying she feels your pain. She empathizes.
Yeah, and I try to reduce it as well because I know how much pain went into that, and I'm the one who gets the job of looking at the client and saying, why? So the infinite scroll, the semi-infinite scroll? Okay, hey, I'm quite sure that some time could be dedicated to building that, but why would you want that? What, it's almost like saying, we can create anything, but we need to justify why we're doing that. Why are we bringing this to you? Because I'm only talking to a client that has, anywhere between 1,500 to 50,000 people's opinions that ultimately will count. But for Lewis and Katie, you're talking about that times all of the client base that we're working with. So it's trying to work across. And so you're really going to want to, I guess, consider that kind of, yeah, sure, anything's possible. And that's, kind of my wheelhouse, the art of the possible. But there has to be a reason behind it, because that's also how the design will work. It's not going to solve any problems you don't actually have. So, yeah.
And that actually made me think of something. It's slightly off script, but I think it's important. So one of the things I find I contend with on the sales side, especially when I'm dealing with like the design team from a customer or prospect or the marketing team, is they are very in tune with design trends. What is sexy? What's interesting? What is engaging people? Do you guys look at design trends and do you incorporate them? Lewis is rolling his eyes and is angry.
There's some that annoy me.
Like a lot of orphisms.
That is
which
an
one is that
accessibility
one?
nightmare.
There's many morphism trends. There's new morphism, glass morphism. There's skew morphism.
Basically,
there's loads
minimal
of orphisms.
Contrast, where what should be a border is like a tiny little gradient to like.
So it looks like glass, right?
Yeah,
That's glass morphism.
I know. Sorry.
Oh, so there's oh my God, this is a whole thing I wasn't aware of. But go ahead, Lewis. You had some serious thoughts. I saw you in the background just go.
I mean, that's where like form has like out at one against function, because like yes, it looks pretty, but then for like a visually impaired user, they can't see the contrast differences. They don't know where like that slight tiny little gradient like isn't, you can't, they don't pick up on that, so it just looks like the same color, and then that what should be like a nice border to signify this is one element, it's just that's just blended into the background. So I mean, yes, it looks nice, but it's not usable for a percentage of users. And then when again, like you're talking about millions of users, that's a lot of people.
Yeah, and go ahead, Katie. You were going to say something. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, I think we definitely look at trends, and I think you see different design trends come up, year after year, and some of them are ones to like take note of. Others are going to last, a few months to a year, and we're going to go off that subject, and you'll see an iteration of that probably in a couple of years' time. But we don't want to be basing our design language off of trends that may only last for a short period of time, and there's other challenges there, such as like the accessibility challenge that Lewis raised. But there's some trends that, you know, are definitely things to like take note of. And we've recently updated our design language, you know, to accommodate some of those trends, such as minimalistic designs, for example. I think minimalistic design like is really important, and it has been. I mean, it's been a trend for a while now. It's not you know, groundbreaking new stuff. But essentially, you know, designing you know, features and pages where there is you know, more white space, and you know, that helps. I feel like that sort of design trend isn't just UI, but it also helps the overall UX. Like that UI does help the user experience of you know, the feature or the platform you're designing for, because white space is really important to for your like mind to like have like white space or like areas of space on the page to like rest. So you know you want those pages to be you don't want loads of content all over the pages, and then it's hard for the like end user to you know, focus on the important aspect of that page, but also have loads of different colors everywhere, and to distract the end user and not take a break.
Yeah.
We're laughing because Lewis's cat continues to jump into frame. What's the cat's name?
That's Vince.
Vince is desperate to be on the podcast. So
Yeah,
if you
Vince
want to
has got
sit
something
there
to say
with
about
Vince in your
sign.
lap, petting him as if you're Blofeld, I am not going to fight you.
Well, the thing was, I could hear him on the mic purring away.
See, and
thought that
I
was
just
Lewis.
thought you were excited, Lewis. I just thought you were excited, but that's
yeah,
fine.
white space is my thing.
White spaces, you think? Well,
Yeah.
and
I
what
mean,
other?
Katie has a point though.
Yeah.
With you need, like, there is something nice about having gaps between content, like, and to help break up and signify where one thing is, where it begins, ends, and the next thing starts.
Yeah, I think as well what you're both picking up on, and I don't know if this is something that you really concern yourselves with, although I think probably you do, is that, you know, there's this whole thing about trends versus, well, to use the sort of fashion and all analogies, is trends versus style, right? So trends are passing, styles forever. And, you know, things like what Katie's talking about, the white space, in order to make things clearer, snappier, it's much more useful in accessibility. It makes for, you know, just a much more enjoyable experience overall, even if you don't explain why you're doing it all the time. That's style. That's forever. It's something we've discovered. It's something that works really well, and you've seen it hang around. Trends, the morphisms, well, I don't think they're destined to stick around too much because they're not useful or practical.
No, I mean, but also, like, part of our reasoning for like increased white space is resolutions and device screens are getting bigger, so there is more space.
Yeah.
Like when we first started Unily, like phones were 320 pixels wide for the screen, like single not double density or triple density resolutions either. So you had a lot less to work with, and now like a phone is almost the size of like a small desktop, like screen resolution.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I imagine it's even more challenging because in the old days, if you bought an intranet product, they had releases every 3 years, and that release was taking into consideration what the new reality was in terms of hardware, screen sizes, and what trends kind of made it through the gauntlet from the previous 3 years. Now that had drawbacks because, you know, you'd get 6 months into using it, and the thing already felt outdated from not only a visual perspective, it actually was outdated from a technical perspective, right? We have a more interesting challenge in that we have to kind of, and I've said this before on the podcast, fix the engine while the plane's flying, or, right, maybe even more appropriate, paint the plane while it's at 20,000 feet, right? Like, if that isn't an image that conjures danger and complexity and maybe a little bit of stupidity, I don't know what does. But how do you guys contend with that, or is that not even in the back of your minds? Because Unily has legacy UI elements. Does that ever factor into the things you do?
Yes. Yeah, you've got to try and update without breaking anything. I mean, there is a piece around deprecation and what can be deprecated and how and when that happens, which is tricky to manage. Mm-hmm. But, well, we're planning for that better at the moment.
And see that he gave us a little taste, but he won't go further than that.
Well, we're R&Ding a templating engine at the moment, so you'll be able to swap out the UI, but without changing any of the logic in the back end.
That's cool. All right, let's not go further than that because it is like in Skunkworks, but so it's something that we're already considering internally because we've realized the challenge. Okay, because that's something I complain about incessantly here at Unily is why don't they just drop that? And all right, it's top of mind. So I wanted to get back to something we tapped upon because I promised I would, was accessibility. Lewis brought it up. I would actually say this is a style, to borrow Alex's vernacular, but this is something that was top of mind when HTML and the web first came out, right? The semantic web is something that people have been talking about for a long time. For those of you that don't know, is like elements in terms of HTML and things are descriptive, in terms of what they do, right? In the old days, everything was a div. Actually, even before then, everything was a table, which was the worst, right? And then they came up with this concept of the div, but the div failed in that it didn't really describe what the document or the page was via code. And this was a problem for screen readers, right? For the blind. It just caused all manner of issues. So then the semantic web became a thing. But accessibility guidelines are now, in force, and companies are adopting them. Organizations are adopting them globally, thank God. Mm-hmm. How do we design? What's your process for designing with accessibility in mind? Because I know Alex and I care because we hear customers asking about it nonstop.
Yeah, I mean, it's more of a technical. Well, I mean, our design language is based, like just the pure UI side of it is based with that in mind anyway. So like correct contrast with text, colors and backgrounds and things. So that piece is out the way. But when it comes to like the functional side of stuff, that's more of a development issue than a pure design.
Interesting.
So I mean, it's part of the UI and the UX. But it's less of a visual thing. If you've got a good design framework to begin with, then it's less of an issue when it comes to putting those pieces together.
I guess that's a really important point as well, is that like when we come to design features, we're not starting with a blank sheet of paper and saying, okay, what crazy designs are we gonna like come up with for this new widget that we're gonna build? Because although I'd love to do that. And just saw Lewis smiling. He's like, you do that sometimes. I try to push the boundaries. But what we need to do is we have like components in place. So like roll-ups have a standard look and feel. So when we're building, when we want to develop a new type of roll-up, like a roll-up that displays frequently asked questions, it needs to be consistent to other features that we've already designed previously, because if we went crazy and designed something completely different to, the roll-ups that we use elsewhere, it's not going to provide a consistent look and feel, which is also really important from like a UX standpoint as well. And those components that we build off, I guess, have the accessibility piece like considered.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think we also try to take it a little bit farther as well. So there are accessibility guidelines that are obviously we follow, and as Lewis said, that's sort of taken into account and sort of, okay, we've done that. We can say we've done that. But then we also have an ongoing conversation with customers, and we have customers who, we sort of have conversations with, even if we're not in the thick of designing their intranet. It's just an ongoing conversation about how can we best use this to meet the accessibility and then some, so there's a lot of, I find that the guidelines are kind of minimal. It's like, make sure you have this sort of thing from a technical aspect, but it's really when it comes into designing the experience and using those options that are built into the features, it's being able to say, okay, so in order to ensure that this is going to cover it off, let's make sure that, your branding is correct and is actually going to be visible no matter what's going on, and that there's also, so I guess it's like, it's the additional part of that accessibility. It's making sure that nothing is so exclusive that people are excluded. Really, we're trying to include people. It's that big thing where everybody's talking about accessibility and all these other pieces, but I want them to talk about the inclusivity. We want to make sure that everybody who's looking at their intranet is able to use it, wherever they come from and whatever they're trying to do with it. And so we try to kind of, make sure things are clear and concise. There's a lot of white space, as they were saying, but I also try to make sure that things are clear and simple so they're easily seen. Or, for instance, for every sort of L&D page I design, I heavily encourage clients to use both a video option, which will have audio to it, as well as the written part of it, which, might be more appealing to others. And I'm not always kind of being brutal about it. It's simply saying, you have multiple options for delivering your content in multiple ways so that people can digest it, whether they have a reason to do so or it's a decision that they're able to make. And you should do those things, really, I guess. And taking, into consideration, I guess, sometimes that design language is there, but it's not something that's made clear to the customer for the right reasons. It's just one more thing for them to think about in some instances when they're sort of knee deep in like, do I put it here or do I put it here? And being able to just I guess broker the deal. So, I for me personally, when I'm doing my work, it's being able to leverage all that work that you've done so that the client can then make the right decisions. And if they don't necessarily go down the right path the first time, I might just move them over to the path that is the correct one that will include as many people as possible.
So we keep talking about design language, and maybe I'm ignorant. I don't know what that means. I mean, look, I am ignorant, but I'm particularly ignorant on this point. Like, what does that mean, design language, as a non-designer? It doesn't resonate with me, I guess.
At a very basic level, it would be defining how different elements look and how they would piece together. So a button looks like this, has these options. Use those.
Interesting.
Or an input looks like this, so that every time you put an input on the page, it looks the same, it behaves the same, and the user can easily recognize that.
And count on it.
Yeah. So that it's not like on this one page, something looks like this, and then you go 2 pages down the road, and all of a sudden, like, it's the same functionality, but it looks very different. Well, that's just confusing to the end user.
Okay, so I'm going to rephrase this, and I'm going to murder it. So apologies. This is going to be brutal. We're coming up, and again, this is a little bit more techie. We're coming up with a standard set of classes and styles and margins and padding on elements so that as you move across widget to widget and as new things are introduced, they don't deviate from one another in such a way that it's awkward and uncomfortable. Did I kind of nail it?
And unrecognizable.
Okay, so that makes more sense to me. And I guess the purpose of this is also that it's reusable. So you guys don't have to build from the ground up every single time, right?
Yeah. I mean, if nothing else, that would just bloat out the CSS and your page would slow down. Like,
That's a good point too. Yeah, there's
Yeah.
practical effects of that in terms of performance. Alex, you were going to say something. I'm
I was
sorry.
going to say, actually, because I was just going to pick up on how both Lewis and Katie talk about it when they say our design language. So just to sort of add that further clarification to say that a button should look like this and it should do this and it should behave in this way. It's useful because it doesn't bloat out your CSS and you're not building from scratch every time, but also because that's the way that we want our product to look across the board. If you went somewhere else, their design language would differ slightly, but it's a set of standards about how all of these elements come together and essentially should operate, should react, what they should look like, and it should be consistent across the board. But it's not consistent across all platforms, all products, because that's something that each company in product development is developing for themselves. There's a commonality to the way you phrase it, hovering. Oh, sorry, Lewis, I'm just going to totally break all of that. But yes, you're using the same words, right, to describe it because you're saying this is our own design language. But it's something that has to be firm and clear for us. And then quite often, and I know everybody has felt this pain when a client brings you their brand guidelines and they have their own design language in there.
Right. Right.
Yeah, no.
That's where I was going.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So in that, we're not going to adapt to it because, what we have is a product with a set of design languages to it. So there will be some consistency. You get the brand, you get all of that. But again, we're not going to break our own design language to accommodate that because, well, okay, I'm saying that and I could be completely wrong. But that's
there's some flexibility in what we have. I mean, we've got nearly 2,000 branding variables to tweak and change things. So some of them are quite broad. So you could change, like the button color, for instance, or its border and things like that. That would just one small change go site wide, and then some of them are really drilled down because clients are like, "Oh, this one thing here, this tiny little thing here, we want to be able to change that." So without having to add or break anything too much, we have the ability to make those small changes here and there.
See, and this takes us to this was actually where I was going to end us because I think this is something that I'm learning more about and I want to understand more about. Maybe our vision for it is the extensibility of the design on our platform, right? I oftentimes talk to customers and they go, "Can I do this? Can I do that?" And I go, "Yeah, you could do it. It's a question of whether or not you want to do that." And they go, "Well, if I did this custom, I could absolutely do this on a problem." I said, "Yes, but then you'd have to manage it." And you need to ask yourself, do I want to manage that? Because now upgrading gets possible. So the real question I'm asking is, do we have a plan to maintain this design language, which sounds overall very positive? Because I think in the past, we've had elements of a design language in Unily, but it's never felt always cohesive. And that's not a criticism. I think it's a product of us evolving the product, right? Is the one that kind of blew the doors off for me was Search Center. Search Center, to me, deviated so much from previous versions of features we'd done that it felt like I was looking at a new design. And maybe I'm wrong in that, but it looked new and different. I'm sure it borrowed from the past. Lewis is thinking about it. Katie's agreeing with me.
That was probably the first implementation of the new design language.
There it is. Okay,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
So
That makes sense now.
If you look at a lot of the stuff in the feature store, that pairs well with the search center. And that's kind of the direction we're going with now.
Okay, that gives me confidence now because I was wondering. So I guess the question is how do you balance a common design language with the extensibility stuff? And by extensibility, I mean, our customers have the ability to change this, and I'm sure other platforms allow that. Like you said, Lewis, there's things that you can do site wide where I can change a button. So instead of the default, blue with no border on my buttons, right? A floating button, effectively. Again, I'm not a designer. I'm just throwing stuff out there. Who knows if it's accurate? I want a red button with a drop shadow, and maybe bolder. Elements on my font on the text. Is that possible? And are you guys taking into to consideration as you evolved the design language?
I mean, we've, over the course of, was it 5, 6, 7 years, however long Unily in some form or other has been going, we've kind of taken on all those little bits from clients saying, I want to be able to do this, I want to be able to do that. And we've incorporated what is feasible and possible and maintainable to do as standard. I mean, there are some clients that have got some out there stuff that we
name names, Lewis. No, don't do that. Don't do that.
that aren't applicable to anybody else, but they're like, this is our brand guideline. This is what we must have. This is like a deal breaker for us, and we're like, we don't recommend that. That goes against the best practices that we think should be in place. But if you must, fine. Like that's your branding, then go for it.
But that's not built into the
No.
Like that kind of thing. That's not extensibility. That's literally like a different
a bolted on customization rather than like there's things that we don't want to include because they don't follow our best practices. But I mean, there is a lot you can do out of the box. Just with like supported brandability.
Yeah. And that's the thing, right? So we'll design like features that, you know, will of course incorporate customers' branding, because that's super important element to make your site brandable so that it's familiar to the end user, like gives off a sense of culture and it's something that they're familiar with. We design features to extend to incorporate customers' branding, theming that they may configure within, you know, the CMS, and that's, you know, colors, logos, typography, fonts, and you know, there's some clients that will, you know, say rather we have curved corners on our features. Now some of our customers say, okay, we don't want curved corners, we want sharp corners, which has been done. It can be done, and that's all like agreed, you know, in the onboarding phase when a customer's onboarded, and like the features we design will take on those design elements that have been like defined up front. I think it's when it, you know, there's fairly out there requirements potentially that like come up where, you know, the features can't extend completely to everything they could ever imagine and want, but it definitely like takes into account their branding.
Yeah, I think we, you know, we're more careful now. We have this established language. We understand the limits. I think we tried, you know, certainly from Lewis and Katie's side, they try to make it clear to those of us who are maybe talking to the clients customer facing at the beginning of their journey, right? So you know, there's a whole other conversation if it's an existing client, but ultimately what we're trying to do is accommodate the things that are most important and be able to use those but without diluting our own decisions and best practice that's been, you know, put in place, because it is there for a reason. It's there because it's doing a good job and because it's simple and because it can be managed, as you said, Paul, and all of those sorts of things. So it's kind of a balance. And quite often if that conversation starts with me, it kind of ends with me as much as possible, because again, you'd have to have a really good justification for going in and changing something that fundamentally, because we have so many options really available.
And Alex, correct me if I'm wrong, but I get the impression that, you know, well, I've seen newer customers that have been onboarded. I felt anyway that a lot of those customers have put more of an importance on design more recently. And, you know, we've had clients like onboarded where they have, you know, massive design teams that are like now put a part of, you know, the onboarding process and have, you know, in my mind anyway, I feel that there's a greater importance now on making sure that the design of employee experience platforms, digital workplaces, intranets, like are, you know, top standard. Like, I don't know whether you feel
Yeah.
the same.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of conversation about it, and what we used to do was just get those pieces in place, and they'll go with it, and they'll just make sure the information's there. And I certainly, from my experience, I want more than that for the customer. I want them to look at the absolutely most aspirational ideas that we have to offer and tell me, I want that, but obviously with my own branding or whatever it is, and to be able to deliver that, because I just think it's very important to your employees. They are going to be visual creatures, and I think for the most part, and even when they're not, make sure that all the options are left there for those sort of other areas. But it's really, I've seen a real sort of uptick, certainly in terms of what those sites are now looking like, because it's a bigger consideration and it's a higher priority.
And I can confirm that in the sales process, the extensibility stuff is, in terms of design, is top of mind now more than ever. And it's again, not that we can't do it. It's about telling customers you're going to want to strike a balance here, because the point of going with something like a Unily is so that you don't have to build from the ground up. Why would you invest in it and then build from the ground up anyway, effectively? Trashing all the good work that we've done around figuring out what works well on certain screen sizes, what doesn't, and also the accessibility stuff. I am amazed that simultaneously accessibility is like all over my radar in terms of my customers, and yet hopelessly absent the minute designers get into the mix. So it's mind-boggling, because it's just, anyway, that's my own personal crusade. But I will throw out a challenge there, and this will be the last thing I say, and then we'll say goodbye, because I've actually learned a lot, and I'm much more empathetic to the plight you both are under. But here's my challenge. We want to see the design language. We want the documentation. We want to say it. We're excited about it. If you ever get around to putting it to paper and releasing it, I think those of us who don't work like you guys do and sweat over it and really agonize over how difficult it is and how things should look would benefit. Because I think I've now learned, there is a lot of thought going into this. And I knew that, but we're emotional creatures, especially me, and I just get angry at the world. So would love to see the design language stuff. Let me do this. Katie, Lewis, it's been a pleasure having you guys on.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, this was a lot of fun. And again, Katie, if you want to be Kaz and Matt's permanent replacement, you are welcome to. No one is going to stop you. They might try to stop you, but the rest of us won't let them. But thanks again for joining. I appreciate it's end of your week and all that. And Alex, as usual, we love having you back.
Thanks.
We miss you when you're gone.
Yeah, wow.
And you're going to go enjoy the rest of your vacation now, I assume.
Yeah. I'll be back
Awesome.
next week.
And next week is excellent. We're looking forward to that. I want to put out a reminder that we do have the Nielsen Norman Design webinar coming up on May 6th. I butchered the name of it. Can I have a voice from the nether reaches, the background? Tell me what that is. Maybe they won't tell me yet.
Designing an award-winning intranet.
I just wanted to get him to talk, folks. That's the only reason I said anything. And I'm not going to repeat it, so he has to leave it in now. So please join us on May 6th. Matt Boyd will be part of that. We'll have our customer, Baker Hughes, talk a little bit about their journey on that project. Don't forget to subscribe to us on whatever platform you're on. We really enjoy talking to you. So have a good weekend out there in the universe. Thank you.